In today's video, I've got you some high protein breakfast recipes that will keep you satisfied and energized as you start your day. There's one simple component that you should meal prep every week, and that is this whipped tofu. It's only 2 ingredients and it literally takes a couple minutes to make. Using this, you can make these grab and go savory breakfast muffins, smoky shakshuka, perfect for the weekend, or for the sweet tooths out there, these cinnamon waffles. The recipes are in the description of this video as usual, so let's get cooking. The recipe for this whipped tofu is incredibly simple. We're just going to add in our tofu. I'm making a pretty mega batch today. And then however much tofu you added, you're going to add half the quantity of a plant-based milk. I'm going to be using soy milk, just for the extra protein. And it's as simple as that. We're now going to blend it until smooth. Make sure to use a spatula to get all of the whipped tofu out. No wastage here. I've kept this unseasoned as I'm using it in sweet and savory recipes. You could add a couple of pinches of salt though, as I do usually add a little bit of salt even to my sweet recipes. The first recipe we're going to make is these savory breakfast muffins, perfect for when you're a bit short of time in the morning. Aha! For the filling, I'm doing caramelized onion and sun-dried tomato. Alternatively, you could cook down some leeks and some mushrooms, that would be really delicious. Or you could do roast pepper and spinach. I'm just gonna caramelize these onions in a little bit of olive oil. And to these, I'm going to add a good pinch of sea salt. I'm also going to add just a really small pinch of bicarbonate of soda. This is going to increase the pH, which speeds up the Maillard reaction and causes them to caramelize really quickly. It's important to only add a pinch or else they're going to break down too quickly and just sort of turn to mush. And then finally, just a tiny pinch of sugar as well is also going to help with the caramelization. I'm also going to add in some sliced sun-dried tomatoes. And lastly, some fresh basil. And that's going to add some incredible flavor to these breakfast muffins. The batter is really simple. We're just going to add some gluten-free flour to a bowl, then a little granulated garlic, nutritional yeast, 1/4 teaspoon of black salt. That's going to give these muffins a sort of eggy flavor. Bicarbonate of soda to make them extra fluffy and light. Some white wine vinegar or lemon juice. And then of course your whipped tofu. Also going to add a nice crack of black pepper. And then just whisk together until well combined. It's gonna be quite a thick batter and it's gonna get really nice and light and fluffy. That's looking good. And then in goes our sun-dried tomato, caramelized onion, and basil mixture, which is gonna flavor these beautifully. And just fold that through. Just gonna lightly fold this in because the reaction has started now between the gluten-free flour, the bicarbonate of soda, and the vinegar. So I've just lined the baking tray with some parchment paper. If you've got little cupcake or muffin cases, then that would be great. And we're just gonna spoon in our mix and we'll just fill them up pretty much right to the top. If you've got a non-stick muffin or cupcake tray, then you might be okay without parchment paper. I'm just gonna sprinkle over a little bit of extra nutritional yeast for a nice sort of crunchy, cheesy topping. And it's good for you, so why not? They're going in the oven at 190 degrees, probably for about 15 minutes, I'd say. I've ended up giving these about 22 minutes and they're lovely and golden and nicely risen. And now I'm just going to get them onto a cooling rack to let them cool. That is a tasty little snack. They've got a lovely crunchy top and then the side they're nice and soft and pillowy, and then you get lots of flavor from the caramelized onion, the sun-dried tomato, and the basil. Really tasty. And they're portable. Next up, we're going to make shakshuka, which is perfect for the weekend when you're a bit more relaxed and you've got more time to cook. Just going to crush and slice the garlic. We're going to get a large pan on the heat with some fairly tall sides. And I've just got that on a medium heat. Then I'm going to go in with 2 tablespoons of olive oil, followed by 1 teaspoon of cumin seeds, which are lovely and earthy and fragrant, and a teaspoon of coriander seeds, which have a lovely lemony floral flavor. And you can just let these seeds sizzle for about 30 seconds, and they're going to release their lovely aromas into the olive oil. We'll then add in the red onion and the red and green pepper. Also a decent pinch of sea salt. We'll cook these down for a fairly long time, probably about 8 to 10 minutes, until they're really nice and caramelized and softening up really nicely. Once you've got the oil and the seeds really nicely coated around your vegetables, you don't want to stir it too often, as we want to encourage these vegetables to get nice and caramelized and sweet and sticky. The peppers and onions have been cooking for about 7-8 minutes, and I'm going to add a teaspoon of granulated sugar, and that's just going to ramp up the caramelization, but also help round out the flavors with the spicy harissa and the slight bitterness from the passata as well. You don't have to add the sugar, but when you think about it, it's only 1/4 teaspoon per portion, and it really does help with the caramelization. So that has had about 10 minutes. The onions are beautifully caramelized, the pepper as well, but they've still got a slight bite to them. We'll add in the garlic now, 1 heaped teaspoon of smoked paprika, and then a heaped teaspoon of harissa paste, and about 1/2 teaspoon of ground cumin. Of course, we have the cumin seeds already in there, so we don't need to add too much. We'll cook out the garlic and the spices for about 1 minute, just to sort of take off the raw edge. If your pan is drying out a bit, feel free to add another splash of oil or a splash of water, it's up to you. And then to deglaze the pan, I'm adding a tablespoon of red wine vinegar, followed by the passata, plus about 100 ml of water or vegetable stock. And then just bring that to a simmer. Once that comes to a simmer, we're just going to let it cook for about 3, maybe 5 minutes, just to reduce the sauce a little bit. Also going to add a good crack of fresh black pepper. And while that sauce simmers, we're just going to season the whipped tofu with a little bit of salt, some nutritional yeast for a nice cheesy, nutty flavor, and a grating of black pepper. I've also added about 1/4 teaspoon of kala namak, or black salt, which is going to give it a nice sort of eggy flavor. You don't have to add it though if you don't want to. So the sauce has thickened a little, and I'm going to make some sort of indents in the sauce for where we're going to put the whipped tofu. And you can just dollop that in like so. And if you want to get fancy, you can make a sort of egg yolk by mixing a bit of turmeric into the last bit of the whipped tofu. But that's very much optional. I'll let that cook for about 2 minutes, and then I'm going to pop a lid on and cook it for another 5 minutes. And that's just going to help sort of steam the tofu. And there you go, that is your plant-based shakshuka, ready for a nice bit of crusty bread. If you like, you can also sprinkle over some fresh parsley, that's really nice. Now for the fun bit, get yourself some crusty bread and scoop up some of that goodness. Look at that, you've got perfectly poached tofu and smoky red onion and pepper sauce. Absolutely delicious. That whipped tofu is just absolutely delicious. The kala namak or black salt really does add a really nice eggy flavor if you're after that. And then the sauce is just smoky, rich, and delicious. This next recipe is for the sweet tooths out there and those who just love waffles, which includes me. So we'll start by combining the wet ingredients, which is of course going to be the whipped tofu to start. And to that we're going to add white wine vinegar or lemon juice, and that's going to react with the bicarbonate of soda. Then some vanilla extract. This is going to help get rid of the sort of tofu taste. We're going to add 1 dry ingredient to the wet ingredients, and that is the ground flaxseed, which is going to help thicken it and give it some structure. And then just whisk to combine. And we'll set that aside while we get the dry ingredients ready. Into a large bowl, I'm going to add some gluten-free flour. This is actually self-raising gluten-free flour, so I'm not going to add any baking powder, but I will add just a little bit of bicarbonate of soda, which is going to react with the vinegar or lemon juice. Then optionally some cinnamon. My girlfriend absolutely loves cinnamon, so I'm going to add about 1 teaspoon. You can add as little or as much sugar as you like. I'm going to go for 2 tablespoons of granulated sugar. I would advise at least adding some to counter the flavor of the tofu and get the waffles nice and caramelized and brown. And we'll add a little pinch of salt, that's just gonna enhance the flavor of the waffles. And then whisk that together to get the cinnamon and the baking soda nice and distributed through the mix. Okay, you probably worked this out, but we're now going to add the wet ingredients into the dry. And then just fold in the wet ingredients. We don't want to over mix it, as that's going to result in really stodgy, firm waffles. We want nice and fluffy ones, of course. You'll start to see that the vinegar is reacting with the raising agents, and this mix is going to be super, super fluffy. It's going to be a fairly thick mix, not particularly runny. You'll see that it's got loads of air bubbles in it, which is going to result in a really nice fluffy waffle. So that's what you're looking for. It's like a thick cake batter, but it's going to be really airy. You can see the air bubbles coming up, and that's going to create a really fluffy, crunchy waffle. The waffle iron is preheated, and I always like to do just a quick test waffle. So I'm just going to brush some oil onto one of the waffle segments, and then spoon in a nice dollop of the waffle mixture, and we'll see how it goes. Once you see that there's only a little bit of steam coming out of the waffle iron, then that is a good sign that your waffle is going to be ready. Nice and golden brown and crispy on the outside, that is a good start. I'm happy with that. I'm gonna make a full batch now and just give the whole waffle iron a little brush with some oil. These waffles are going to be a lot more filling than your average waffle, and they're actually going to give you some decent energy. You've got the tofu in there, you've got the flax seeds, and you should feel pretty good after eating them, rather than having the massive sugar crash you get from regular waffles. Oh yes, that's a good sign. The sizzle. All right, let's take a look. Oh yeah. I always pop them onto a wire rack, or I've just got an oven rack here, and that's going to stop them from going soggy from the steam. So we ended up with 9 of these high protein tofu waffles, which are golden and crunchy on the outside, and then they have a lovely fluffy and open crumb on the inside.